this video. Hi, Roxy. Are you camera ready? I mean, you're very photogenic. Hello. Thank you. Hi, I'm Julia. This is my parents' dog. Hello guys, gals, and non-binary pals, and welcome to my YouTube channel. And also my parents' house. This picturesque setting is not my condo, obviously. Roxy, stop. I'm trying to film video. She's being very rude. Because it's Christmas time and I'm staying with my folks. Trigger warnings in this video for brief discussions of non-consensual surgery, big talk about Nazis, and brief mention of sexual assault. So in November, I read Lilac Girls by Martha Hall Kelly. I picked it up because it was very similar to my favorite book this year, which is Rose Under Fire by Elizabeth Wayne. While I was reading it, I inevitably compared the two because I picked it up as comparison read, but I was sorely disappointed in Lilac Girls, which has led me to making this video, which is sort of a comparison review. The books are similar in that they both follow women who were at Ravensbrück concentration camp in World War II. Lilac Girls takes place over the course of several decades, and Rose Under Fire takes place over the course of about 6 months, and then about 1 year after the war ends at the Nuremberg trials. Lilac Girls follows 3 women, a society New Yorker named Carolyn, a Nazi doctor named Herta, and then a Polish girl who was experimented on in Ravensbrück concentration camp by Herta named Kasia, who's a teenager. The book follows the 3 of them from the invasion of Poland to the late 1950s, and it concentrates more on Carolyn and Kasia in the last third of the book. After Kasia and her sister Susanna escape Ravensbrück, they return home and have to live in post-World War II communist Poland, which is just as awful as it sounds. Carolyn hears about the rabbits, which are women who were experimented on like Kasia and Susanna, and helps bring them to America to help give them corrective surgery because their wounds from surgery in Ravensbrück never fully healed, and also give them a kind of months-long tour around the States. This is where Carolyn and Kasia, 2 of the main characters, finally meet after several hundred pages, but Susanna, Kasia's sister, and Carolyn have more connection. And now that I'm thinking about it, Susanna would have been a much better POV figure for this book, but I did not write this. Now, Rose Under Fire by Elizabeth Wayne is about an 18-year-old ATA pilot named Rose Justice. She's American, but she's flying for the British because that was one of the only ways that American women were able to fly during World War II. Rose is returning from flying her uncle to a mission in France when she is captured by Luftwaffe pilots and taken to Ravensbrück, which was an all-women's concentration camp. There weren't a lot of Jewish prisoners here. It was mostly like French, Polish, and Russian prisoners. This is in fall 1944 when Ravensbrück is already tens of thousands of people over capacity. Rose is taken in by a multi-generational family of fellow prisoners who help her survive in the camp. One of those people is Rosiska, who was one of the rabbits who was experimented on, and she was 17 when the book starts, and she was 14 when she was experimented on. And she's been permanently crippled by that experiment, and she's barely able to walk. Rose also befriends Irina, who was one of the Russian night witches. 3 of them are separated after they escape Ravensbrück, and then Rose and Rosa are reunited after they meet at the Nuremberg trials. I was comparing the 2 books so much in my brain that I wanted to do a review that was essentially comparing why I think Rose Under Fire is better than Lilac Girls in 4 crucial ways: characters, voice, pacing, and description. First, the characters. In Lilac Girls, as I already mentioned, we have 3 point-of-view characters: Carolyn, Herta, and Kasia. Before I even begin to talk about the characters and their personalities and the way they work in the plot, I really don't understand why Carolyn and Herta were given as much page time as Kasia was. Her story is, I mean, it's the one that we care about the most. She's the one in the concentration camp. Herta is a Nazi, we do not sympathize with her, and Carolyn is an ocean away and has this whole romance subplot going on, and it's just like an entirely different book. Kasia has been through hell, and Carolyn is like, oh, I guess I'll have to sell off my silverware to donate to the cause of the French resistance. How can you possibly sympathize equally with these characters? It's just impossible. You're setting yourself up to fail and to not care about the other 2 characters in comparison to Kasia. I mean, you shouldn't care about Herta anyway, but Carolyn especially. So Carolyn has this whole romance with this French actor named Paul. Oh, by the way, Carolyn was a real person. just so you know. I thought that if this romance with Paul was real, it would be weird to write about Carolyn and not include it. But the romance is just like this really weird part of the book, because like the whole time I just did not care. But come to find out, the whole romance is made up, and it didn't need to be there at all. Carolyn isn't married, but Paul is married, and then when his wife has a baby, she's mad at him. That's his wife. Like, how can you possibly have any ground to stand on when Paul was in a concentration camp and his wife was like in hiding the entirety of the war? And then when Carolyn meets Paul again, she's like, oh, we've suffered equally. It's like, he was in a concentration camp and you like sold off your silverware to help pay for some things. You still kept both your country house and your apartment in like downtown New York City. These things are mutually exclusive. I mean, the book is named after her, Lilac Girls, because Carolyn had a bunch of lilac trees in her upstate New York country house. Honestly, the section where Carolyn brings Casey and the other rabbits over to America was the most effective part of the book for me, and I think it would have been perfectly fine if the bulk of the book was about Casey, and then Carolyn was introduced in the last third as this benevolent older female figure, but we had to follow her the entire book for no reason. Next, the Nazi doctor, Herta. It just makes my blood boil that I had to read almost a third of this book from the perspective of a Nazi. Early on, Herta is raped by a butcher that she was working for, and I think it was to make us feel some kind of sympathy for the character, and while, yes, sexual assault is an awful thing that shouldn't happen to anyone, I did not need to feel any sympathy for this character whatsoever, because later on, Herta is hired to work as a doctor at Ravensbrück, and she goes through all this, like, systemic sexism, and yeah, Nazis were sexist. Who would have thunk it? But she's the one who experimented on Casey, and the fact that Casey and her torturer were given an equal amount of POV time is just disgusting. Moving on to Casey, who in my opinion was the most important and interesting character of the book, and she still wasn't that interesting. I think that what was so important about her was what she went through, but her personality was very difficult to define for me. I think that the biggest part of her personality and the thing that sets her apart from your average character is the amount of anger she feels. That's really how her trauma manifests, is anger, and I mean, who can blame her? But that doesn't really get to blossom until the last third, and I feel like through most of the book she is just this passive observer that things are happening to, which is very different from the anger of her counterpart in Rose Under Fire. The rabbit character in this book, Rosa, is also very angry, but it manifests as this like bitter cynicism that kind of pushes away the people around her who at the same time want to protect her, and it's done so much more effectively in this book. There's a passage in Rose Under Fire where Rose, the main character, is talking about Rosa, and she says, "When I told anyone at the camp who I was, I'd say, I'm Rose Justice, I'm a pilot. When Rosa first told me who she was, she'd said, I'm Polish political prisoner 7705, I'm a rabbit." And I think that is a really good description of also who Casey is, because she really has no personality outside of the fact that she used to be a Girl Scout who was captured while doing resistance work. And I wish there was more to her than that. I really, really do. But you can more describe her by the things that happen to her, by the things that she does, which is just really sad to me. And I don't think that it's the author commenting on how much of her agency was stripped from her, because Rosa has far much more agency in this book while having gone through the same experiences. Also, something that I didn't mention is that in Lilac Girls, Casey, her older sister Zuzana, and her mother Helena are all captured at the same time. And I think there was a really good opportunity for telling a beautiful story about 3 family members in the same concentration camp, and yet I felt much more about the found family in Rose Under Fire than I did about Casey's actual family. Now we get to the main character of Rose Under Fire, Rose Justice. Oh man, I can already feel the tears welling up. It's fine, we're gonna work through this. Rose is a really effective character, especially for this book, because in the beginning she's very naive. She's kind of like a Pollyanna character. Her first few diary entries are talking about like this date that she went on, and she's American, so she hasn't really experienced the horrors of World War II that Europe has. And her optimism is one of the things that really defines her. She talks on and on about hope and how she has all this hope. It's also such a terrible thing to have because of when things don't become better for her, she's really disappointed because she had hope. If she hadn't had this hope at all, she wouldn't have been disappointed. But also, I think the best way to describe Rose is her relationship with other characters. One of the most important themes of this book, even more important than hope, is the relationships between and the friendships between women. Rose has many foils. There's Maddie, who is a holdover from Codename Verity, who is an older pilot figure who has already gone through this sense of loss with her best friend Julie in Codename Verity, and who is a kind of older, more experienced pilot. Another foil is Rosa. Rosa has cynicism to Rose's optimism. Rosa also has trauma to Rose's innocence. And then Irina, the Russian pilot, has all this combat experience compared to Rose, who, aside from knocking a flying bomb out of the air in a really cool move in the beginning of the book, has not really had any combat experience. I've never read anyone who does female relationships like Elizabeth Wayne does. I mean, they are just the center of every single one of her books. I just identified with Rose so much, like more than any other character in fiction. I mean, she's a Girl Scout and she sings Girl Scout songs and graces that I know. And like the way that she acts is like, that's the way that I would react to things. And so to see her go through all that she does, I think was especially effective for me because it felt like I was going through these things. So another very important plot point in Rose Under Fire is the women trying to get word to the outside world that this is happening, that they are being held there, and that the rabbits have been experimented on. There's this frequent refrain of Rose writing in all caps, "Tell the world," because she needs to tell the story of what happened, and then also the prisoners are constantly trying to get word out, whether it's with paper airplanes or hidden messages. They need the world to know what happened. I forgot to mention that Rose is a aspiring poet, and so this book is interspersed with poetry that she's written. And the most effective and longest poem is called The Subtle Briar, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but in the middle of this poem is a rhyming list of the names of the women who were experimented on, and that is also printed in the front plate of the book. This is just a repeating list of the names, and these are the real names because this actually happened. And I think that's why this part is so effective, is because it's this beautiful rhyme, but at the same time it's reminding you that like these were real women with real names who were tortured and experimented on. Now on the other hand, in Lilac Girls, there is a brief part about Susanna and Casey getting a message to their father on the outside about what's going on. They send this coded message to their dad, and because this book is written in alternating chapters, it's not until 3 chapters later that you get to see that her dad got the message, and then, like, nothing comes of it. I mean, I know that historically nothing came of it, but you compare that plotline that just, like, does not resolve to the abject desperation that the girls in this book have of we have to get a message out. Frequent refrain of "tell the world" and the rhyming name list, and it's really telling you that this story needed to be told because it is remembering these women and it is making sure that this does not happen again. This book has such a sense of urgency. It grabs you by the hand and it shakes you and it's crying and it's begging you, please, I'm starving, I'm freezing to death, but if you do nothing else, my God, tell the world. And in a world where children are being kept in cages on the border of my country and are not even being allowed to have flu vaccinations, stories about concentration camps are more vital than ever. And I just get the sense that this story has so much more urgency to it than Lilac Girls does, because this story digresses so hard about romance and society and a Nazi doctor when all it really needs to do is talk about how awful concentration camps were and how we all need to do our part to make sure that they do not happen again. So, that's characters. I was trying to articulate why I think Rose Under Fire is a better book, and one of the things was in the descriptions. We always say show don't tell, and Lilac Girls does, like, it doesn't just say, like, oh, I was feeling sad. It does describe, like, how she feels, but compared to Rose Under Fire, and this also ties in with voice later, Martha Hall Kelly tells us how Casey is feeling, and Elizabeth Wayne makes us feel what Rose is feeling. Nowhere is that, I believe, better done in a very similar passage in two books talking about the same character. So Herta Oberhauser, who is one of the characters in this book, was a real person. She was the female Nazi doctor who experimented on the rabbits, and she is also mentioned in this book because she's at the Nuremberg trials. Rose never interacts with her. Rosa knows her around in front of the building where the trial is happening, and some high-profile prisoners are taken out of cars. Suddenly, Rosa grabbed my arm and hissed in my ear, "Look, that's Fisher, and that's Gebhardt. They did it." "Did what?" I asked. "Tied me down in a prison cell and cut chunks out of my bones." I stared. Being on the winning team gave us no strength. Rosa clutched my arm, and there we were, standing in the dark in a flurry of German snow, and we might as well have been standing in the roll call square back at Ravensbrück. "That's Oberhauser," Rosa choked. "Shh!" There wasn't any reason to hush her. There wasn't any reason except I felt instinctively that we'd be walloped for talking and pointing. "Oberhauser's the woman?" I whispered. "Yes, she helped." So in this passage, you feel the sense of dread and the sense of, like, not being safe, because it talks about standing in the dark in a flurry of German snow, they're whispering, the two of them are together. Like I said, Rose is defined by her relationships. A lot of her very important moments happen with other characters. Compare that to Herta's point of view kind of drops out of the book after she is convicted in the Nuremberg trial, but as happened in real life, she was let out after about 5 years, I think, and in real life, one of the rabbits found out and hunted her down, basically, and in this book, it's Kasia who does that, and pretends to be a patient because Herta has set herself up as a family doctor. The door opened, and I turned to see the woman who'd stepped out of the silver Mercedes slip into the room. I froze, my mouth suddenly full of sand, and then placed my glass on the desk. It was Herta. I sat, my whole body jellying, as she eyed my paperwork on the clipboard, her attitude somewhere between bored and irritated. Why was I shaking so? What was the worst that could happen? "What can I help you with today, Mrs. Bukowski?" How could she not recognize me when her face was so etched in my mind? Once my heart stopped thumping so loudly, I became more comfortable with my role. She really didn't recognize me. So I was skipping ahead there, but I was just skipping to the parts where Casey was talking about how she was feeling. So in this one, it takes a lot longer for you to get a sense of what Casey is feeling. Wayne does it effectively in less amount of time, I think. And also, she makes you feel, with her evocative language, way better than Kelly does. Next, we'll compare how both Cassia and Rosa were captured. Cassia has just intercepted a flying bomb, and she's flying over France, and it's kind of contested territory, so that's why the Germans are there. And she's spent all this time and fuel, like, tipping the bomb, and so she's kind of lost track of where she is, and that's when the German planes catch up to her. I guess Daddy would say I had my head down in the cockpit for too long. He'd say I didn't keep enough of a lookout. It's true I didn't see them coming, but I don't think I could have done anything about it, even if I had. I didn't know what the intercepting planes were. I knew they were German, and I could tell they had jet engines, but I didn't have a clue what the planes were. They were Luftwaffe camouflage, with black crosses on their fuselages and swastikas on their tailplanes. Their engines hung down from their wings like bombs. I'd never seen anything fly that fast. The first one came at me from below and behind, and the other from above and behind, and they corkscrewed around me with their engines roaring, and suddenly they were gone, one of them breaking left and the other right, but I was still in my wide, slow orbit, and they came screaming back at me, one passing me on each side. It was exactly like watching swallows flying. He made a wide, level turn to the left, practically a U-turn, and headed off back in the other direction. I actually sobbed aloud with panicked relief, praying that I would never see him again, that I'd never seen another Luftwaffe aircraft in my whole life. And then I glanced back over my shoulder, and the other guy was still there, stuck to my tail. "Go away!" I screamed pointlessly at the sky. In about a minute, the first guy was back in exactly the same deliberate position ahead of me and to my left. And when he knew I was watching, he rocked his wings again. And I figured out what he meant. Follow me. No, 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 I sobbed to the indifferent sky. And so they fire at her just to basically show her that if you don't follow us, we're going to shoot you. And so she has to follow them and land the plane. Then we compared to Kasia. Early on in the war, she's part of the Polish resistance, and she takes too long helping a Jewish girl, and she's spotted returning from that to her job in a movie theater. I made good progress, but before I was even out of Old Town, I felt someone following me. I bent to tie Hannah's boot, the paper package crinkling in my sack, and glanced behind me. There was the brown shirt who'd seen me at Z's, busy dispersing a group of young people. Had he seen me go into the basement? I shook off the bad thoughts and ran on. I slipped through the ticket booth door and caught my breath. It was a small room, barely the size of a small bathroom, and featured a paper-shaded yet ticket window and one high stool. Had anyone followed me? I flipped on the lights and touched the cash box, cold and smooth, to calm myself. I would need to keep my wits about me, sort the money, and keep the window shade pulled down for now. I moved the shade aside and peeked out the ticket booth window. An electric jolt ran through me. Was it possible? The brown shirt who'd seen me at Z's stood talking with two other Hausfrauen in the ticket line. Then her sister Susanna comes in. Kasia, why are you so white? Did you see a brown shirt out there? She tossed her bag in the corner. That's a fine hello. I've been in the country doctoring the sick in exchange for the eggs for your breakfast, dear sister. I pulled the shade aside, and there he was. He had moved on to speak with a young woman in line. I think he followed me, from Z's. Leave, now. I turned to Pietrek. You and Louisa, too. If they find you here with me, they'll take us all. Susanna laughed. Last time I heard, there was no law saying Z's is off limits, though there's a law about everything else these days. I checked the line outside again. The woman nodded and raised a finger in the direction of the ticket booth door. My whole body went cold. He's asking them about me, I said, a giant drain sucking me down. They're telling him I'm here. My heart contracted with what I saw next. Matka, her mother, at the far end of the line, shouldering her way through the crowd toward us, basket in hand. Susanna pulled the shade from my hand. Keep looking guilty and you will be in trouble. I could barely breathe. Don't come, Matka. Turn back now before it's too late. And then it ends on one of these really bizarre chapter cliffhangers that are in this book. I feel like chapter cliffhangers are really amateurish writing thing to do, because one, I'm not 6 years old and reading Harry Potter, and two, you have to wait like 2 more chapters to get through the other people's POV before you get back, and it's like totally unnecessary, I feel like. Also, there are a lot of really weird time skips in this book, and I'll talk about that when I talk about pacing. And so it kind of like stutters along, like it'll have a scene, and then it'll break in the middle, and then you have to wait to the next chapter for the scene to resolve, and then the scene will resolve, and then it'll skip ahead like a few months, and it's like, why didn't you just have the scene end where it's supposed to end, and then skip ahead to a few months later in the next chapter? So then this scene resolves with, before I could even answer Susanna, the ticket booth door burst off its hinges, and 3 SS Blackshirts jumped over it into the booth. One grabbed Pietrek, her crush, off the floor, and the other dragged me by the arms out of the booth, the coins from the cash box flying everywhere. The SS men pulled us past the crowd, and the people in line stared and whispered to one another. I turned and saw the SS man who had followed me, close behind, holding Susanna and Louisa, each by one arm. Matka broke through the ticket line and ran after us. The look on her face scared me as much as anything. I'd only seen that look once before, on the wild-eyed face of a horse hit by a carriage and dying in the street. She clutched the little basket with my sandwich in it close to her chest. Go home, Matka, I called. No, please, you have the wrong people, she said to the guards. She went on like that, then came running after us, begging the man to release us until one of them said, if she wants to come so badly, let her join them, and grabbed Matka as well. He snatched her basket and threw it to one of the German women waiting in the ticket line. Not only is Kasia captured, but her whole family is captured, and it is a, in my opinion, much less effective scene of the growing sense of dread that you have in Rosa, where, like in this book, this relief of like, oh, the plane's gone, oh, now it's back, and also, as part of the voice, there are a lot of things in italics and caps in this book, which makes sense because diegetically, it's all being written down in a diary by the main character, but it also has this really good sense of voice where it's written like someone is telling you a story rather than in a more literary style, and it really feels like you're there, and it's like kind of a stream of consciousness, like in the moment thinking, and here you don't really get like the sense of panic. At Ravensbrück, all the other prisoners were very protective of the rabbits, one because they were so young, and two because they'd been through so much, having been experimented on and having been there for such a long time. There's a big plot point in Rose Under Fire about how the rabbits are going to be executed, but the whole camp comes together to try and hide them. And this is the moment when they hear that the rabbits are going to be executed. Les lapins? The French girls exploded in outrage. The rabbits? The croquis? All of them? No, never! Hide them, Micheline exclaimed. Hide every one of them tonight. All of Ravensbrook will fight for the rabbits. People are waiting for a chance to fight for the rabbits. Carolina? Irina asked me. Rosa? All of them. The whole Lublin transport. Lizette, too. Rosa, as one of the rabbits, is being hidden, and then Rose's number also comes up as someone to be executed. And so they hide her in this hole underneath the floor of their block. She and Rosa are huddling together. They're like sardines in a can, basically. And so it's this moment that is kind of emblematic of the relationships in this book of, like, it's not like this kind of schmaltzy, like, oh, women are coming together to help each other because of this hardship. There are women that fight against other women, like the Nazi women are awful. There is also this sense of all these people are stuck in this awful situation and they are helping each other. So in Lilac Girls, there's a similar section, but I think it's much less effective. The Nazis were giving up. They did not give up killing us, though. The windowless black transport buses came to the blocks with new urgency. Fat Dr. Winkleman in his long leather coat and his partner, old Nurse Marshall, prowled the camp, looking for sick prisoners to mark down for the buses. Sick women hid everywhere to escape, under the blocks, above the ceilings, behind the coal bins. Susanna invented a method of scraping the arms of women arriving from evacuated Auschwitz to cause their tattooed skin to appear infected, to hide their blue numbers. Everyone in the camp continued to hide the rabbits when roll call came. Some even traded numbers with us at great peril to themselves. And that's, like, it. And then she and Susanna are able to escape just a few days later. So here are the moments when they escape in Rose Under Fire by stealing a plane. So Irina, Rosa, and Rose are all together, and Rose is flying. And they fly over Ravensbrook, and this is the first time they've seen it from the air. That's it, Rosa said. That's us? That's what the American bombers see. She clambered forward, hanging perilously over my shoulder and staring. It doesn't look very big from up here. I know, I said. I know, but I couldn't let myself cry. I was flying. I clenched my teeth and muttered in the back of my throat. Are you doing the counting out rhyme? No. Is it you or Malay? Malay. Say it so we can hear. I choked out the last lines of Dirge Without Music. Down, down, down into the darkness of the grave, gently they go, the beautiful, the tender, the kind. Quietly they go, the intelligent, the witty, the brave. I know, but I do not approve, and I am not resigned. I turned. I didn't want to fly into the searchlights. I told Irina the new heading. It was a pilot's pinpoint. That's all. So we can see another really effective use of poetry in this book, even though it's not the author's, it's Enda St. Vincent Millay's. Here's the moment when Susanna and Cassia escape together in Lilac Girls. They're in this Red Cross caravan that's being bombed by the Allies, but they are escaping. A tea kettle cried somewhere close, already at a boil. A bomb. The earth shook, rocking the bus, and the lake lit up like a camera flash. It's the Allies bombing, the nurse said. They must think we are a German caravan. The tea kettle whined again, and we cried out as the ridge above us split and our faces lit up, as if around a campfire. At least the impact felt like something, like we were alive, and sent us to the rubber floor. I held my sister to me, bone on bone, and we fell against the others. Did she breathe? Did I? I pressed her to my chest, warm against me. Soon the bus engine came alive, and we lurched on towards Sweden, our two hearts one. In my opinion, the one in Rose Under Fire is much more effective. Another thing that's very similar between Rosa and Cassia are the ways that they react after the war. I mean, they're both very bitter. So this moment in Rose Under Fire is when Rose is trying to convince Rosa to be a witness at the Nuremberg trials. Rosa says, "Forget about revenge. These trials aren't about revenge. They're about justice. Don't you want justice, Rose Justice?" For a moment, I thought she was going to burst out in her evil cackling laugh over her own stupid pun. Instead, she started to cry. I'd only ever seen her cry once before, and that had been a full-fledged tantrum. She always made such a big production out of laughing like a witch that I was unprepared for the simplicity of her despair now. She hardly made a sound or moved, but big, silent crystal tears like Cape May diamonds slid quietly down her cheeks. "Of course I want justice," I said through my teeth. Aching with guilt and loss and the colossal unfairness of it all, I buried my face in my hands for a moment. "Rose, I can't do it," I heard her gasp. I looked up. "What?" I said. "You can't do what?" "I can't do the trial. I can't be a witness. I just can't." "Oh, Rosishka." I sat down beside her and pulled her into my arms because I knew exactly how she felt. She buried her face in my shoulder and sobbed. I'd never seen her cry like this, not ever. Oh, man. And this is the moment when Zuzana and Cassia have been brought to America, and they're about to go through their corrective surgery, and Cassia gets cold feet. Zuzana took me by the arm, and none too gently. "May I speak with Cassia in private?" She steered me around the corner. "Are you out of your mind?" "I can't do this again," I said. "I know this is hard for you, but you won't have this chance. Let me think about it." "No, Cassia, it's now or never." The thought of another plaster, and how do I know I can trust them once I'm asleep? "There'll be no plaster," I asked, "and I'll walk you there. Keep an eye on things." "Stay with me?" "I'll scrub in if they let me. Watch the whole thing. No one will hurt you except me if you don't get back in there." And then she just wakes up after the surgery. In Rose Under Fire, it's this really big plot point in the last quarter of Rose trying to get Rosa to be a witness at the Nuremberg trials, and in the end, they both agree. In order to get Rosa to be a witness at the Nuremberg trials, Rose has to agree to be a witness at the Hamburg trials, which is the trial for all the people who were at Ravensbrück. And so it's this whole big deal in the last quarter of the book, and it's this conflict when the conflict of the war has been removed and they've already gotten out and they're safe, but it's this big emotional conflict. In Lilac Girls, Cassia being reluctant to have her surgery could have been this conflict, and resolving it could have resolved this emotional thing between her, Caroline, and Zuzana, but it's not. And the outside conflict of Herta and finding Dr. Oberhauser comes in at kind of the last minute, and it is this good moment of getting justice, but I don't feel like it's an effective resolution of the anger that Cassia feels, which makes her this kind of unlikable character. In Rose Under Fire, Rosa should be unlikable, and Rose even says she can be this like cackling witch sometimes and she pushes people away, but also people really feel the need to protect her. One of the characters, Carolina, sacrifices herself in order to get Rosa out of Ravensbrück, and everyone is trying to get her out so that she can be a witness and she can show people what the Nazis did to the rabbits. But unlike in Rose Under Fire, you don't get a good sense of who Cassia is because you can't really define her by other people like you can with Rose. And she has this trauma, but like I said, that's like all there is. And it's good that she gets this closure, but it's also like a really internal thing, and I just don't think that she's a strong enough character to have this like internal struggle and resolution, and I just don't get a good sense of her character when she's just doing all these things herself. This is another moment of Rose being defined by her relationship with other people. So there's this woman named Anna who's a German prisoner, but she's also kind of an overseer for the other women, and she and Rose have this sort of friendship, but no one else likes Anna because she is German, and she has just heard that she is on the same list as the rabbits of people to be executed. I thought about offering to swap clothes with her, to swap our numbers. I really did. It is the Girl Scout in me, always wanting to help. She was an okay group leader, and now she just seems so grim and crazed, so afraid, but I couldn't come up with a good reason to sacrifice my life for her. But the fact that she even thinks about it and references her Girl Scout past, like, it's... God, that part just gets to me because Lilac Girls make such a big deal out of Cassia being a Girl Scout and, like, being involved with the resistance, and yet she never has this moment of Girl Scouts being part of her identity. I wish that she would, like, it would add something to her character. It's just part of her backstory. Like I said, the pacing for Rose Under Fire is way better than for Lilac Girls. It kind of stutters and skips forward in time, and it's just like everything is stretched out over such a long period of time that you don't get the same emotion as you do. Rose Under Fire did the right thing by setting it within 6 months and then a year after the war. And you still get, like, a way better sense of closure in Rose Under Fire, I think, because it happens in such a shorter amount of time. In Lilac Girls, it's really drawn out because, you know, you've got Cassia's years in Poland, and then her trip to America provides some closure for her, and then she finally only gets closure, and closure for her mother, crucially, in the last few pages when she exposes Herta. Another thing is that I wish that I felt more about Cassia and her mother, Helena, but since you don't get to see them interacting much, she spends way more time talking about how much she misses her mother than she ever did with her mother. And also, you don't really know what happens to her until the last few pages. Like, it's clear that she died, but you don't know how. And so it's this kind of like drawn out thing that I'm just like unable to feel much about. So in conclusion, as I think I've made pretty clear, Rose Under Fire does a far better job of using the same locations, characters, and themes as Lilac Girls does, but Lilac Girls has all this extra story it was trying to tell, and it is ultimately about the rabbits, which is why I think that it didn't need all the extra stuff with Carolyn and the Nazi doctor. 2/3 of this book seem extraneous, where Rose Under Fire is this tight story, and it's much more effective in telling the story about the rabbits in a shorter amount of time, and Elizabeth Wayne is able to do this through characters, pacing, voice, and descriptions. I highly, highly recommend this book. I wish I could have just read out loud the whole book for this video to prove my point, but you can go do that on your own time, so please read this book. I would honestly skip Lilac Girls. I just think it does not have as much of an emotional impact as Rose Under Fire does, and that is why it was such a big disappointment. But I did love this book, so please go out and read it and read all of Elizabeth Wayne's work. Thank you all so much for watching. I know this video is going to be longer than usual, so if you stuck with me, thank you. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. I've got a lot of videos planned for coming up, so hopefully I will get those all out within a timely manner. Bye! Happy holidays!